My name's Elizabeth, and I just turned 17 when my life took a wild turn. Let me paint you a picture of my family. On the surface, we seemed decent enough. Dad worked his ass off, and Mom stayed home. I had a little sister, Amy, who was 12 years younger than me. Dad was a big shop manager at this company that belonged to my maternal grandmother. Grandma was a real go-getter. She started with a chain of laundromats, then expanded into making household chemicals and detergents for laundries. When she decided to retire, she offered the business to Mom. But she wasn't interested. So Dad stepped up and took over the company. That's when things started to get complicated. I remember the day it all went to shit. I was in my room, trying to focus on homework, when I heard Mom screaming at Dad downstairs. "You're nothing but a loser, John. This is my house, my family's business. You should be grateful I even let you run it." Things got worse over the next few weeks. Mom and Dad barely spoke to each other, and when they did, it usually ended in a shouting match. I tried to keep Amy distracted, but even at 5, she knew something was wrong. Then came the day that changed everything. I came home from school to find Dad in the living room, a suitcase at his feet. "Dad?" My voice cracked. "What's going on?" He walked over to me, pulling me into a tight hug. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I can't stay here anymore. It's not good for anyone." I felt like I couldn't breathe. But what about Amy? What about me? Dad pulled back, his eyes shiny with unshed tears. "I love you both so much. Never forget that. But sometimes love isn't enough." He kissed my forehead, then walked over to Amy, who was watching us with wide, confused eyes. He knelt down, hugging her tightly. "Be good for your big sister, okay, pumpkin?" And just like that, he was gone. The door closed behind him with a finality that left me feeling hollow. Mom came home an hour later. When I told her Dad had left, she didn't seem surprised. She just nodded, like she'd been expecting it. "Good riddance," she muttered. "Mom, I couldn't believe what I was hearing." "How can you say that?" She turned to me, her eyes hard. "Your father cheated on me, Elizabeth. Multiple times. I couldn't take it anymore." That night, as I lay in bed, I could hear Mom on the phone in her room. She was laughing, sounding happier than I'd heard her in months. I wondered who she was talking to, but I was too exhausted to care. Just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated after Dad left, Mom dropped another bombshell on us. "Girls," she announced one morning over breakfast, "I have some news. I'm getting married." I nearly choked on my cereal. "What? Mom, Dad's only been gone for 2 months." She waved her hand dismissively. "Sometimes, true love comes unexpectedly, Elizabeth. You'll understand when you're older." Robert moved in a week later. He was, okay, I guess. Tall, good-looking in that generic way that makes people say, "Oh, he seems nice." But something about him rubbed me the wrong way from the start. He made an effort with Amy, playing games with her and helping her with her homework. But with me? It was like I barely existed. Meanwhile, changes were happening at the company too. Mom had taken over after Dad left, and she brought Robert in to work with her. They seemed to make a good team, always huddled together, discussing business strategies. I tried to focus on my own life, school, friends, the usual teenage stuff. But it was hard to ignore the nagging feeling that I was becoming invisible in my own family. Things came to a head when Mom and Robert announced they were opening a new branch of the company in another city. "We're moving," Mom told me one evening. "It's a great opportunity for the business. As for you, Robert and I have been talking, and we think it might be best if you stay here." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Stay here? Without you?" "It's just that the new house won't have much space," she explained hurriedly. "And you're almost done with school. It wouldn't make sense to transfer now, right before your exams." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "So where am I supposed to live? On the street?" Don't be dramatic, Elizabeth, Mom scolded. You'll stay with your grandmother. She's already agreed to it. I stormed off to my room, slamming the door behind me. As I lay on my bed, hot tears of anger and hurt streaming down my face, I couldn't help but wonder, when did I become such an inconvenience to my own mother? The next few weeks were a blur of packing boxes and tearful goodbyes, not from me, but from Amy, who didn't want to leave her friends. I helped her pack, trying to put on a brave face for her sake. Will you come visit us, Lizzie? She asked, her big brown eyes full of tears. I hugged her tightly. Of course I will, squirt. You can't get rid of me that easily. The day they left, I stood on the porch with Grandma, watching as the moving van pulled away. Mom gave me a quick hug, Robert nodded awkwardly, and then they were gone, taking Amy with them. Living with Grandma wasn't as bad as I'd feared. She was cool in her own way, giving me space when I needed it, but always there with a cup of tea and a listening ear when I wanted to talk. Still, it wasn't home. My 18th birthday rolled around faster than I expected. I woke up that morning feeling weird. Like I should be excited, but all I felt was empty. Mom called, of course. Happy birthday, sweetie. Her voice was bright, almost too cheery. I'm sorry we can't be there. Work's just crazy right now. We'll celebrate when we visit next month, okay? I knew we wouldn't. They hadn't visited once since they left. Sure, Mom. Sounds great. Grandma must have sensed my mood because she went all out. She let me invite a few friends over, ordered my favorite food, even baked a cake herself. For a few hours, I almost forgot about everything else. The next morning, Grandma called me into her home office. She had the serious look on her face that made my stomach clench. Sit down, Elizabeth, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. We need to talk. Oh God, I thought. She's kicking me out. Where am I gonna go? But then she smiled, reached into her desk drawer, and pulled out a small folder. Happy birthday, sweetheart. Open it. I did, and nearly dropped it when I realized what I was looking at. Grandma, is this? She nodded, her eyes twinkling. The company is yours now, Elizabeth. I see potential in you, kiddo. You've got a good head on your shoulders, and I know you'll do right by the business. But Mom and Robert, they're running it now. Grandma's face hardened slightly. They're running a branch. The main company, the heart of it all, that's yours now. I sat there, stunned. Me, barely 18, owner of a multi-million-dollar company? It felt like a dream. Or a nightmare. I don't know what to say. Grandma reached across the desk, squeezing my hand. You don't have to say anything. Just promise me you'll give it your all. I nodded, still in shock. I will. I promise. She sat back, satisfied. Good. Now, I've got one more piece of advice for you, and I want you to listen carefully. I leaned in, hanging on her every word. Call your father. There's more to that story than you know. Talk to him. Take him on as a consultant if you want. But hear him out. It took me a week to work up the courage to call Dad. We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown. When I saw him, my heart clenched. He looked older, tired, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. There was an awkward silence. Then, suddenly, everything came pouring out. The divorce, Mom's remarriage, the move, Grandma's gift. Dad listened, his face a mix of emotions. When I finished, he took a deep breath. Lizzie, there's something you need to know about the divorce. And then he told me everything. How Mom had never respected him, constantly nagging and putting him down. How she called him a loser, made him feel worthless. How, after one particularly bad fight, he'd gotten drunk and made the biggest mistake of his life. I cheated on her, he admitted, his voice heavy with shame. Once. I regretted it immediately, but your mother, she used it against me. Threatened to sue, to take everything. She demanded I leave, give her all the property, leave you kids. She even wanted alimony. I sat there, stunned. This didn't sound like the mother I knew. Or thought I knew. Why didn't you fight it? I asked. Dad's eyes met mine, full of sadness and love. Because of you and Amy. I didn't want you to go through a messy, public divorce. I thought it would be easier this way. As we talked, I felt a weight lifting off my chest. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had my dad back. Before we left, I took a deep breath and asked, Dad, how would you feel about helping me with the company? As a consultant? The smile that spread across his face was answer enough. The months flew by in a whirlwind of studying, exams, and late-night cram sessions. Before I knew it, I was standing on the stage at my high school graduation, diploma in hand. Grandma was in the audience, beaming with pride. Mom and Robert were conspicuously absent, but I'd learned not to expect much from that quarter. As summer rolled in, I threw myself into college applications. With Grandma's encouragement and Dad's long-distance support, I set my sights high. When the acceptance letters started rolling in, I could hardly believe it. But the real shocker came when I got the financial aid package from my top choice. Full ride, I breathed, staring at the letter in disbelief. Grandma whooped, pulling me into a bear hug. I knew you could do it, kiddo. All those late nights and competitions paid off. I'd chosen to major in business management. It seemed like the smart choice, given that I now had a company to run. The idea still felt surreal, but I was determined to make Grandma proud. To celebrate my college acceptance, Grandma insisted on throwing a little party. Just the two of us, some fancy takeout, and a bottle of sparkling cider. Grandma wasn't about to let me drink champagne, even if I was legally an adult now. We were halfway through our meal when the doorbell rang. Grandma frowned, clearly not expecting anyone. I'll get it, I said, putting down my fork. I opened the door and felt my stomach drop. There, looking annoyed and impatient, stood my mother and Robert. Before I could say anything, they brushed past me into the house. Mom didn't bother with pleasantries. Mother, we need to talk about the company. Now. I watched, stunned, as Mom launched into a tirade. She didn't even glance my way, didn't ask about graduation or college. It was like I wasn't even there. Why can't we access the main accounts, she demanded. And why are you blocking the transfer of capital to our subsidiary? Grandma's eyes narrowed. Because it's not your decision to make anymore, Helen. The company belongs to Elizabeth now. She's the one who'll decide its future and manage its finances. The room went dead silent. The tension in the room was palpable after Grandma's revelation about the company. I watched as a series of emotions flashed across Mom's face, shock, anger, and then, calculation. Suddenly, her entire demeanor changed. Elizabeth, sweetheart, she said, her voice soft and sickly sweet. I've missed you so much. Why don't you come live with us? I blinked, caught off guard by this sudden change. Mom stepped closer, reaching out as if to touch my arm. I instinctively stepped back. We've settled in so nicely in the new city. We have a beautiful house, and there's a room just for you. We could set up a desk, get you a new computer for your studies and work. No, Mom, I said, my voice steady. I'm happy here. I have my friends, my school. And Grandma needs me. Mom's smile faltered for a second before she rallied. Well, if that's the issue, we could always move back here. We could live in our old house, just like before. Wouldn't that be nice? I shook my head. It's not about the house, Mom. It's everything. I saw the anger building in her eyes, barely contained. Before she could speak, I decided to ask the question that had been burning inside me for months. Mom, why did you really divorce Dad? She stiffened, caught off guard. Well, your father, he cheated on me. Multiple times. I was tired of it. He abandoned us for his mistress, didn't even pay alimony. That's not true, I said. Dad told me everything. There was only one time, and it was because of how you treated him. He didn't abandon us, you kicked him out. And he's been paying alimony regularly. Mom's face contorted with rage. How dare you? You ungrateful little brat. You have no right to meddle in my personal life. Everything here belongs to me, and I decide who lives where. Grandma, who had been quietly watching this exchange, finally stepped forward. Her voice was calm but filled with a steel I'd never heard before. That's quite enough, Helen, she said. You seem to have forgotten a few key points. This house? The company? They belong to me, not you. I gave the company to Elizabeth because I trust her judgment far more than I trust yours right now. I think it's time for you to leave. I watched, a mix of emotions swirling in my chest, as Grandma firmly ushered Mom and Robert out of the house. The door closed behind them with a final sounding click. As we stood there, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief wash over me. I'd lost something today, the last illusions I had about my mother. But I'd gained something too. A certainty about my path forward, and the knowledge that I wasn't alone on it. What now? I asked, my voice muffled against Grandma's shoulder. She pulled back, giving me a small smile. Now we get back to celebrating your college acceptance. And tomorrow, we start planning for your future, your real future, not the one your mother tried to force on you. The morning after the confrontation with Mom and Robert, I woke up to the sound of voices downstairs. Curious, I crept down the stairs and peeked into the living room. To my surprise, I saw Dad sitting on the couch, deep in conversation with Grandma. As I sat down next to them, Grandma explained why she'd called Dad over. I've been thinking about Amy, she said. Your mother, well, I'm not sure she's in the best position to care for her right now. I've suggested that your father seek custody of Amy. I felt a surge of hope. Really? Dad, are you going to do it? He ran a hand through his hair, looking both nervous and determined. Yeah, I am. It won't be easy, but Amy deserves better than what she's getting right now. I couldn't help it, I threw my arms around him. Thank you, Dad. As we pulled apart, Grandma cleared her throat. There's more, she said. I've hired a private investigator to look into your mother and Robert's affairs. Over the next few weeks, life fell into a strange new rhythm. I started my college classes, throwing myself into my studies with a determination I'd never felt before. Dad came over regularly, and we worked on rebuilding our relationship. It felt good, having him back in my life. Then, about 3 weeks after that morning conversation, Grandma called us both over. Her face was grave as we sat down. The investigator's report came in, she said without preamble. And, well, it's worse than we thought. She laid out the facts, each one hitting like a punch to the gut. Mom had been cheating on Dad for years, long before the divorce. Her affair with Robert had started while she was still married to Dad. There were hotel receipts, records of expensive gifts, all painting a damning picture. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Robert is a con man, Grandma said, her voice hard. He's done this before, seducing wealthy women, convincing them to move assets around, and then disappearing with the money. I felt sick. So when they wanted to move the company's capital? Grandma nodded. Exactly. He was planning to steal it all and run. We sat in silence for a moment, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Grandma said that we needed to confront Mom with the truth. The meeting was set for the next day. Mom arrived at Grandma's house looking annoyed and impatient. Her expression changed to one of surprise when she saw Dad there too. What followed was one of the most painful conversations I've ever been part of. Grandma laid out all the evidence, the affair, Robert's history of fraud, his plans to steal from the company. With each revelation, I watched my mother's face, hoping to see some sign of remorse or understanding. Instead, all I saw was denial. This is ridiculous, Mom sputtered. Robert loves me. He would never. You're all just jealous of our happiness. Dad tried to reason with her. Helen, please. Look at the evidence. Think about Amy. Is this really the kind of man you want around our daughter? But Mom wouldn't hear it. She stood up, her face flushed with anger. I don't have to listen to this. Robert is a good man, and I trust him completely. You're all just trying to ruin my life. With that, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. As we sat there, I realized something. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of what was sure to be a long, difficult battle. But looking at Dad and Grandma, I knew I wasn't facing it alone. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional turmoil. Dad, with Grandma's unwavering support and her lawyer's expertise, filed for custody of Amy. I tried to stay focused on my studies, but it was hard not to get caught up in the drama unfolding around me. The day of the custody hearing arrived, and I insisted on being there. The proceedings were grueling. Mom's lawyer tried to paint Dad as an absent father, but our lawyer came prepared. He presented evidence of Dad's consistent alimony payments, his attempts to stay in touch with us, and the stability of his current living situation. Then came the bombshell, the private investigator's report on Robert's fraudulent past and their plans to embezzle from the company. I watched Mom's face as the evidence was presented. She looked shocked, then angry, then lost. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. When the judge announced his decision, granting Dad full custody of Amy, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that Amy would be safe, sadness that it had come to this. As we left the courthouse, Amy in Dad's arms, Mom approached us. "This isn't over," she hissed, her eyes blazing with fury. Grandma stepped between us. "Yes, Helen, it is. Go home." The hits kept coming for Mom after that. The judge ordered her to pay child support to Dad for Amy. It was a reversal that clearly shocked her. She'd always assumed she'd be the one receiving support, not paying it. I threw myself into my studies and learning about the company, trying to distance myself from the ongoing drama. But it was hard to ignore the satisfaction I felt when I heard that Robert had left Mom, running off with another woman and a significant chunk of Mom's personal savings. It was a crisp autumn evening when Dad called me, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Your mother showed up at my place today," he said. "She wanted to reconcile. Said she'd made a mistake, that she wanted us to be a family again." My heart clenched. Part of me, a small, childish part, wanted him to say yes. Wanted our family back the way it used to be. But I knew too much now. We'd all been through too much. I told her no, Dad said firmly. I told her that ship had sailed a long time ago, and that I wouldn't put you or Amy through that again. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "Good," I said, surprised by the strength in my voice. "You deserve better, Dad. We all do." There was a pause, and when Dad spoke again, I could hear the smile in his voice. "When did you get so wise, Lizzie?" I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. "I learned from the best." As I hung up the phone, I looked around my room at Grandma's house. My textbooks were spread out on the desk, next to a stack of reports from the company. Photos of me with Dad and Amy smiled back at me from the bulletin board. This wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself a year ago. It wasn't perfect, there was still so much to figure out, so many challenges ahead. But it was real. It was mine. I thought about Mom, suddenly alone after all her scheming and manipulations. I felt a twinge of pity, but it was overshadowed by a sense of justice. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. As for me, I had a family that loved me, a company to run, and a future full of possibilities. It wasn't the path I'd expected, but standing at the threshold of my new life, I realized something important. Time flies when you're juggling college and a multi-million-dollar company. Before I knew it, I was halfway through my degree, buried in textbooks and financial reports. Weekdays were a blur of lectures and late-night study sessions. But weekends? Those were sacred. Every Friday, I'd pack a bag and head home to Dad and Amy. "Lizzie," Amy would squeal, tackling me with a hug the moment I walked in. At 10, she was all gangly limbs and endless energy. Dad would emerge from the kitchen, usually wearing an apron. "Just in time for dinner," he'd say with a grin. Those weekends became my anchor. We'd eat together, Amy chattering about school, Dad and I discussing the company. After Amy went to bed, we'd often stay up late, poring over business strategies. Sundays usually found us at Grandma's. She'd cook up a storm, filling the house with the smell of roast chicken and apple pie. After lunch, we'd sit on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. "I always knew you had it in you, Elizabeth," Grandma would say, squeezing my hand. As graduation approached, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Dad was true to his word, running the company with skill while preparing me to take over. "I'm ready to hand over the reins whenever you are," he told me one evening. I hugged him tight. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." Life wasn't perfect. There were challenges ahead, decisions to be made, a company to run. But as I looked at my little family, Dad, Amy, Grandma, I knew we could face anything together.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked. We could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick! What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. As the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1, if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.